Yeah, to start off with, I actually find myself praying, and you may roll your eyes, you may find this weird, but I believe every good gift comes from God, and if this is what I think it is, not my presentation, Bitcoin, not this, then I actually pray, God, protect it so it can succeed like Gutenberg's press or the things that helped history and humanity move forward and are pro-human, not anti-human. So, okay, so just some context of my approach tonight. I liken it to most people, except 99% of people use a cell phone and have no idea how it works. But they don't need to know how it works. It just does the thing that they need it to do. So don't panic too much about the technology. I have some books up here, and we can talk about deeper dives as we go through. But my goal is literally to talk about what Bitcoin is, kind of describe it high level so people can get an understanding of that, and then why it matters. So I just want to start off with, actually, what do you guys think Bitcoin is? What have you heard? I'm curious to open up the room and just hear people what have you heard? What are your thoughts? What do you liken it to? Do you have any context at all? And then we'll go from there. A lot of people associate it with the recent scandal that happened with Sam Bankman, whatever his name is, and FTX. And by the way, Tom Brady, who completely took a bath in that. I don't know if you knew that. I think he's watched a commercial today. Yeah, I was. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So some people associate it with that. Some people associate it. Why is it? It's just like the fact that we spend on Visa, right? It's the same thing, and it's actually not. There's some very, very, very big differences there. So cool. All right, let's go into more and try to keep me. I really want to end after 45 minutes, and I want to leave as much time for questions as possible because I guarantee you'll have them. So I'm going to use phrases up here. As I use phrases, read them, but know that I'm going to unpack them. I had a couple people look through my slides, and they're like, Dave, you're just going to, and I'm like, no, I'm not breezing by these things. These are like trigger points to talk to you guys about. So the first question in understanding what Bitcoin is to understand what money is in the first place. Back in 2016, when I became intrigued with Bitcoin, I thought I knew what money was. But I fell down the proverbial rabbit hole here where to understand what Bitcoin is to understand why Bitcoin is different than what we use today. And to understand that, you have to understand what it is we're doing with money. Is money your dollar bill? Is it what the banks are doing? How is the Federal Reserve involved? What is the government doing? How do they get money? Have you heard, what does inflation come from? All those questions have to be defined. We have to ask ourselves what money is. So to start off with, money is a really cool invention, honestly, of humanity. So let's go back to the beginning of time. You're fishing, right? You figured out how to fish. So you're now surviving. You catch a fish a day, right? Maybe you're catching more fish. You're like, great, I would really like to have some milk. And there's that guy over there who's figured out milk, right? So you grab some of your fishes and you walk over and you're like, hey, I'll trade you for some milk. He's like, I don't want any fishes. I want shoes. Well, now you have a conundrum, right? What do? I just have fishes. And he's like, well, I don't want that. So then trade breaks down. You can't go any farther at that point. So humans invented money. They're like, oh, what about a third neutral thing that we can all trade, right? That has value, that allows us to trade for the milk or whatever. And I'm being really simplistic, but you can imagine what that does. And that has actually brought the economy to where it is today, where you can go to work in an extremely specific way and get enough money to pay for all your groceries and your housing and your life, right? Called the division of labor. The only way that happens is if we have something called money, which in the first bullet point is the collective invention of humanity that accelerates trade and empowers technological growth. So the reason we have iPhones today and that we're in a heated building and all sorts of amazing things that we get to enjoy. We're not in a heated building? Nancy's. Okay. The reason we have cell phones and smartphones, sticker, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. And I don't have one either. I have an Android. So Androids for the win. The reason we have all that is because over time, the ability of people to trade and build on what they can give and take their skills, and instead of Jody, you having to farm and then get water and then make your own shoes and then all these things, you can now specialize in a task, right? Become very, very good at that, pass on that information and value, and these division of labor actually increases the entire ability of humans to have technological growth and to get to where we are today. So money underlies all that. Money is the thing we all trade that says, here's a 20, and the storekeeper goes, I don't know what this piece of paper is. No, he says, oh, this has value, and here's my goods, and back and forth we go into the modern economy. That's the first thing what money is. The second thing it is, and these are somewhat overlapping, is that money is also a functional store of value, enabling technological growth by persisting across space-time. Now that sounds really sci-fi, doesn't it? What it means is people for history have realized if I'm going to work hard, I would like to have more than just what I need for today. I would like to have savings. And it's in the Bible, it's all over the place. Luke preached on it, so forth and so on. Well, how do we persist something over time? You might say, oh, I've got extra this month. I'm going to buy a bunch of apples for my savings. How does that work out? Well, that works out terrible, obviously, because your apples only last, a couple weeks, right? So, right. But even so, right? Humans are trying to find a way to take the value that they work so hard to create today, right? Somebody pays you for your value and move it through space-time. And to do so, it requires some things that we're going to go over. So those are the two kind of what is money, right? Understanding what those are on a high level informs us more or less of what Bitcoin might be. So in order for it to work for trade and to move value through time, space-time, is the following 8 things that, well, I would say probably 6, but some of them are newer that are emerging. So I'm going to go through them. Some of the words probably will make sense. Somebody who's reading through my slides, they're like, what is fungible? I'm like, good question. So let's just go down the list. So in order for money, and let me back up too. Humans will choose the best money possible. If they're not forced into a certain type of money, which is what we see actually a lot of, they will collect around money. Why do you think gold is money? Was there some king that was like, gold shall be money? No. Humans chose it because it works in a lot of these categories. It does the thing they want it to do, right? So there's a collective movement of humanity to do this, and then governments and kings started going, well, yes, of course, gold is money, and we'll just be a part of that, and so forth and so on. So let's go through them. Durability. Going back to the Apple example, why are apples not good money? Well, because they're not durable. They don't last very long, right? Gold is one of the most durable things, which is why it's emerged over history as something that's been used as money. Portability means, can you get it from one place to another? There were islands in the Pacific where their money were giant stones that were immovable. But because it was a small economy, you'd be like, that's my wealth right there, and you'd point to the giant rock. But ultimately, if you think about like trade and how things, like you have to be able to move it. It has to be portable. It can't be stuck in one spot. Fungibility, here we go, we'll define it. Fungibility means I can trade one piece of it for a like piece, and they equal each other. So exchangeability, fungibility, yeah. The idea that like diamonds are not good money. Do you know why? Because they're not the same size, right? With gold, you can melt them down. They can all be the same kind of sizes. So that's what fungibility is. Verifiability seems obvious, but can I verify this is actually gold or the thing that you said it is? So forth and so on. Divisibility. If all you have is giant hunks of gold, that doesn't help when you want to buy a candy bar, right? And to be able to chop it up into smaller pieces. Scarcity is one of the most important ones. And this is why gold has kind of emerged over time as a money. Scarcity is what they call unforgeable costliness. Paper is not a good money. I mean, set aside the fact that we trade paper notes, but what I mean is paper is not a good money because we can just make so much of it that it's worth it. It's not scarce, right? But a scarcity says, oh, that's a valuable thing that can hold value and it's not going to be blown away. There's a great story of a small island, I think in the Pacific. Spanish explorers, or I think it might have been the English, came, and they were using these small little rocks that were very rare on their island for money. Well, the Europeans came and they're like, oh, like through islands away, like these things, or we can get these things like. So they bring shiploads of them and destroy the local economy after they buy up all the land. So you see, like scarcity obviously matters on those kind of things. And so established history, it's called the Lindy effect. People collect around something that shows that it has an established history. So gold's been around for 6,000 years that we know of, maybe even longer and so forth. Like those are the kind of ideas. And then finally, this one's new, and this one has been merging in recent last 50 years is censorship resistance. Censorship resistance means no one can restrict my ability to save, to spend, to do what I need to with the value that I've created. If you've heard the term or the acronym CBDCs, stands for central bank digital currencies. China's putting one together. I think Canada's trying to get one. People say, well, that's the same thing as Bitcoin. It's absolutely not. It's very, very prone to censorship. China will tell you when you can spend your money. And actually, they've even shown, they have apps in China about COVID stuff, and people that were showing up to protest certain things were actually shut off from using their funds by the central government. So that paints a picture, hopefully, in some sense of what money is and why we use it. Now the question is, what is Bitcoin and why does it matter in this scenario, right? This is where we want to go next. So I'm going to tell the story of Bitcoin and describe what I would call the 4 things of what Bitcoin is. So let me tell you the story. So 2008, on like a Reddit channel at that time of what would you call basically it's called a cryptography mailing list. These are guys that were like, actually almost went to jail in the 90s because the government came after them because they invented cryptography. They invented and they pushed it forward and they made it applicable. But basically cryptography is a way to hide and keep your secrets without somebody being able to break them. But on this same kind of mailing list, there's been a history of people trying to create a non-government controlled currency. How can we spend money without Big Brother telling us what to do and stuff? Lots of failed attempts, lots of attempts that didn't fail. In 2008, a pseudo-anonymous individual, he, she, they, we don't know, by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto released his open source code and introduced what he called the white paper onto this cryptography mailing list to say, hey, I've done it. Of course, there's a lot of skepticism. They'd seen a lot of these, and oh, sure, whatever. A couple people started running it, started doing things. And and then this is in October of 2008. In January 2009, the first miner goes active on the network. So he basically has some software. He releases it out there. Somebody else on their computer downloads this software, starts running it, and it creates what we call now the Bitcoin blockchain. The very first, they call it the Genesis block, was created. And then we'll get into this a little bit more, but then it's just a matter of chaining these blocks together, if you will, over time. So that was in 2009. That talks about what open source software is. If you think about what Microsoft Windows is, it's not open sourced. Microsoft owns it, and they will sue your pants off if you try to do anything with it without buying their license. Open source began with many various things. One of the biggest ones known is an operating system called Linux. But basically, it was like, hey, it's better for all of us if we just release the source code, all the code, and let people make variations and check it out and so forth and so on. So when the software that runs Bitcoin Core was released, it was released as open source. Here, everyone, run it as you will. And so that's why some guy later downloaded the software, started running it on his machine, and then the official Bitcoin network came into existence. So Bitcoin starts as a software, or it begins as an idea as a software. So if you think what software is describing something. Then the network begins to grow. More computers begin to download the software, join the network, they're communicating, they're validating the blocks, and then the digital asset begins to grow. In October 4th of 2009, so a little over a year, or not quite a year, the first exchange rate is published, pegging 1,309 Bitcoin to $1, which means at that point you could spend $1 and get 1,309 Bitcoin. Or vice versa, if you were mining and you had all these Bitcoin, you could trade them in for $1. So then it became the digital asset. It actually had a value attached to it. The first real transaction exchanging Bitcoin for, of all things, pizza, happened in 2010, where somebody bought 2 pizzas for 10,500 Bitcoin. Now that guy probably regrets it at this point, but that's the nature of the way things work, right? And it's a good point, and I just want to hold on to this. Sometimes people go, oh shoot, I'm too late. Well, you're not too late. That guy thought he was too late, but there's a growth that's happening, and you're going to find yourself somewhere in that spectrum, but there is not a too late to this. In 2016, the network hash rate, so if you think of all the computers running Bitcoin software, okay, the network hash rate for the first time reaches 1 exahash per second. That means all the computing power trying to mine Bitcoin reaches 1 exahash per second. That sounds big, doesn't it? Oh boy, I didn't want to get super technical. It's just a lot of power. It's a lot of computing power. Think about your processors running, energy expended. Zzz, you've been in a data center, you work in computers, that is, an exahash is a measurement of how many. You have gigahashes, terahashes, like gigabytes, that sort of thing. But hashing is basically processing power against the network, basically. So exahash sounds like a pretty big value, but actually if you ask what is it today, just recently it passed 300 exahashes. So the network keeps growing, and the amount of power brought to it, the amount of processing power that's brought to it. And around 2017, there was what they call the block size war. It concluded with a hard fork of multiple chains. So people took the original open source, they changed it because they said, you're doing it wrong, original Bitcoin, and they went off to make their own. And that's why when I put this BTC up there, I want to point this out. There are pretenders who branched off, and they felt that the engineering trade-offs that were made in the original software weren't good enough. So they branched off, started their own coin, and they have basically, their prices have fallen off a cliff. What happens in this case, in these scenarios, is that the community, people as a whole, make just individual decisions, and they collectively become something. Like what happened in the 90s, everybody collectively began to use the internet. There's no fiat decision. There's no master saying, everybody use the internet now. People said, oh, this is useful. I'm going to use it. And as they did that, they began to enforce the decision that they're all using it. So Bitcoin is not a thing. It is 4 things. Does that make sense? It's software that is run on a distributed network, right? I actually have a node that I'm running at home where I connect in and I'm validating blocks and so forth and so on. I'm running the Bitcoin core software. The network, a digital asset, meaning it actually contains value. It's not nothing. It's not just bits and bytes. The Bitcoin itself actually contains value now, and it has become an asset, like you would have a piece of gold or something like that. It has a value you can exchange it for. And finally, BTC is the acronym used as compared to anything else. So that you can actually see one called Bitcoin Cash, which is BCH. It's Bitcoin Gold, BTG. Sometimes people get into it and they're like, I gotta buy some, and they just go out and buy one that looks cheaper, and sadly they end up on the wrong network, basically. And I'll get into some of this. There's a whole world of cryptocurrency. FTX was itself a trademark. It's basically 3-letter acronyms of sorts. Think about stocks. Stocks have it. It's similar like that. But I will at some point show you that Bitcoin is not a cryptocurrency. It is either the only cryptocurrency or it is something altogether different than all the other ones. And I'll show you why that is. And that's a confusion people often go through. All right, so I love this. Bitcoin is the first digital system which enforces scarcity without any middlemen and is the first asset known to humanity whose unchangeable supply and schedule of issuance is known completely in advance. So let me unpack that. It's a big phrase. First digital system which enforces scarcity without any middleman. Right now, when you use a dollar bill, you have lots of middlemen. You have Visa, you have your bank, you have the Federal Reserve, and you have the US government, and they're all involved. So when you spend your dollar, they all have something to say and they all have some sort of power and control over it, okay? Bitcoin has no middlemen. Bitcoin enforces scarcity without the need for having somebody to do it for you. If you've worked in computer technology, you have something called a database. Somebody has to run that database. So Visa or the Federal Reserve or somebody's enforcing however number of dollars there are based on their decisions, not anything else. And this is the first asset known to humanity whose unchangeable supply and schedule of issuance is known completely in advance. What this means is every probably minute, second, they're printing more dollars. And it's been that way for a lot of currencies throughout history. Even gold, I saw a news article, they just discovered like a humongoid mine of gold underneath Nigeria. So if you think about what makes gold great, it's the scarcity. But all of a sudden they open new mines, or even it's been talked about. Musk and some folks are looking at mining asteroids. If they were to grab an asteroid and mine it, they've already estimated the amount of gold, and there could potentially double the amount of gold on Earth. So that takes away the gold scarcity. All of a sudden, it's like the ship showing up with all the beads, being like, "Hey, you thought you had scarcity? Here you go." However, this Bitcoin is different than that. Into the code is written, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. Now you might say, well, code, change that easily. I'll tell you why. I'll show you why it cannot. The amount of effort to change that code is literally insurmountable at this point based on the network effects. But we'll get into that. But these are two of the biggest things that make it different than any other money we've ever had before. Remember back to those things we were talking about? Can you guys see that okay? Those 7, 8 categories of what makes good money. Here's some grades. Bitcoin has been referred to as gold 2.0 because it takes some of the problems of gold, some of the weaknesses that gold has in these categories, and helps to solve them. So durability up top, you've got gold and Bitcoin together. Fiat currency, by the way, fiat is a way you refer to like government money. Flat. I wish. It's hockey stick currency. That's what you call it. But what it means is like fiat means decision, right? The decision of the government. So fiat currency means it's at the whim or decision of whoever's in charge. That's what they call fiat currency. So Bitcoin and gold get a plus, if you will, in durability. And you know why gold is durable, but Bitcoin is durable because of the network effect and some of the things surrounding why you can't change how things are validated and why the code is basically locked into stone at this point. The divisibility, so we say, well, yeah, but I mean, Bitcoin, if they go up in price, you don't want to go around doing one Bitcoin. Bitcoin is divisible down to 8 decimals, and they call them Satoshis after the maker. So there's 100 million Satoshis in a Bitcoin. So its divisibility is really good. Gold is harder to be divisible, and this is one of the ways that the Bitcoin has a better take on it. Fungibility, gold and Bitcoin are both fungible. Fiat currency is not fungible in the sense that every day you trade. It's like a slow boiling point. Is the dollar you would trade in last year the same as you would trade? It's slowly changing over time. The units aren't staying the same. And then if you've got 75 governments around the world, you can't go and, I mean, dollar is the standard right now, but there's not a lot of way to kind of trade it out that way from a fungibility standpoint. Portability, I don't know if you guys want me to go through all these. Verifiability, scarcity. The only one where Bitcoin doesn't win is its track record. It's only 14 years old. But the Lindy effect, which is a measurement of what happens to humans as they begin to trust something, is the Lindy effect means once you pass a certain point of trust, humanity's trust in a certain thing, it's a hockey stick, right? So the internet, how many people trust the internet? Almost everybody now, right? In the 90s, how many people trust the internet? Not very many, but you passed a certain point. 20 years is that point where once something's been around for 20 years, it's the people assume that it will be there, that it cannot go away. And based on that trust, then they begin to add into that trust by using it more and so forth and so on. It becomes a kind of a snowball effect there. So, all right, so a couple more notes. Like I mentioned, absolute scarcity, 21 million Bitcoin or 21 quadrillion Satoshis overall. It's censorship resistant. It's been said that everyone who participates owns Bitcoin and no one owns Bitcoin. No one can prevent you from using your Bitcoin. There is no middleman to stop you. Now you can put yourself in scenarios where you have a middleman onto the Bitcoin network, but there is no reason you need to. And in many cases, software is being built as a second layer on Bitcoin with the intended purpose of it not being also censor resistant, open source as well. Trustless. What that means is right now, you have to trust that Visa is not going to turn your payment back. You have to I'll call it trust. You have to trust that the Federal Reserve is not going to print more dollars. Oh, shoot, it did. So there's a lot of trust in the system. You have to trust that the shopkeeper sees the same value and will accept it and so forth and so on. Bitcoin being trustless means you don't have to, in order to own and hold Bitcoin, there's no one to trust. It's mathematical at this point. So you don't have to go, oh, there's that guy or that institution that I hope they do everything right, otherwise this thing goes down. It's completely mathematic at this point as to what its strength is. Distributed ledger, my node, many nodes around the world hold the entire copy of the Bitcoin blockchain. The blockchain is the ledger over time of how Bitcoins came into existence, who owns them now, and what history they went through. And all the way back on my node, I have the Genesis block, and it's this chain of transactions that go all the way through. So if all of the internet was shut down in America and all the nodes were turned off and everything like that, the ledger's not lost. It's distributed all over the world now. It's all over the place. So you can't really shut it down that way. And then finally, decentralized. Decentralized is similar to the censorship resistance and whatever. It just means that there's no one thing there's not one centralized thing that controls it all. Everybody's running the software. And even in a sense of there's even developers still working on the software, but there's also computers attached to the network called miners that are actually building new blocks and based on transactions that people have. And then there's nodes, which is kind of what I run, which is a small computing device that validates based on the rules the new blocks put on the chain. So a miner can say, oh, here's some transactions. We should put this at the end of the chain. And it starts to spread and people say, nope, that's not valid. Throws it out. And then another miner has the opportunity to put it on there. So those three entities or types of entities on the network provide that balance of decentralization that not one can have more power than the other. All right, I wanted to hit this most important because people are like, great, cool, I can learn about Facebook or you can tell me about Rust code or whatever, who cares, it doesn't affect my life now. This is why Bitcoin matters, in my opinion. So the first thing is it's actual honest money. Throughout history, when you have a centralized entity in charge of money, humans, so all Christians here, humans suffer from the sin problem. Everybody in this room, everybody in this world suffers from a corruption problem. And it's been almost proven that every human who gets their hands on the magic button will use it in a corrupt way. It is inevitable at this point. History tells us that, and as I joke, like people are like, well, if I was king, nope, all of us, like we all stand in judgment of the fact that we want to put our finger on the scale. We want to be able to have the magic button to spray money in the most effective way that we feel is important, right? You follow me on that? This is actual honest money because in Bitcoin, no one can do that. It has an issuance. It's right now we're at the every block that's put on 6.25 Bitcoin get released into the world, and every 1,400 blocks or so that becomes 1,400. There's what they call the halving epochs of time, where every 1,400 blocks they take that issuance and they cut it in half, so that someday in the year 2140, there's no more Bitcoin being released in the wild. All 21 have been released and so forth. So all that to say is there's no way to corrupt the system. Or, I mean, not say no, I don't want to be exaggerating. More than anything else in history, this is money that has the highest level of incorruptibility based on how humans would want to use it. That makes sense? Now, what I don't mean is, I want to get some Bitcoin and use it to buy weed or, whatever. You can do with money what you want. Right now, you can get dollars and do that, right? That's not going to prevent you. The point is that at the fundamental layer, nobody gets a one-up on anyone else. That's why it's actual honest money here. So that anyone who transacts in Bitcoin starts at the same point. This is huge. Empowering the poor. Most people in the West go, oh, Bitcoin, I mean, it's so volatile. I don't know if that's good for us, right? And they go on about that. Countries like Nigeria, Lebanon, who are seeing 100% inflation rates over the course of a year, they've been asking them, like, why are you in Bitcoin? Isn't it too volatile? And they're like, have you seen our currency? Like, to them, this is a very, very good way to be able to localize trade and store their value compared to what their local currencies offer them. So around the world, there's what they call the unbanked or the underbanked. These are people that cannot get a bank account. In the Middle East and Africa, it's 50% of the population. In South and Central America, it's 38%. Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Republic is at 33%. Asia Pacific is 24%. And even the US, okay? 21% of the population of the US is either unbanked or underbanked. That means they just decide not to get a bank account. It means they cannot because of their criminal history, because of their amount of money that they have, and so forth and so on. There's all those reasons and stuff like that. That's because there's rules around banks that don't want certain people in, and around the world it does that sort of thing. But there's local communities flourishing because everybody has a smartphone now. There's no unphoned, pretty much. So almost everybody has a smartphone, and there's almost internet access almost everywhere. And local communities are using this to trade value rather than trying to figure out how to run a rough economy without being able to use the banking system and the reserve. El Salvador, shockingly in 2019, decreed that Bitcoin was legal tender. And when they did that for one reason, or one of the main reasons, which is, I think they've estimated that in 2020, El Salvador received nearly $6 billion in remittances, 23% of its gross domestic product, from El Salvadorians who are overseas sending money home. Okay? Every time somebody would do that, they would go through Western Union, MoneyGram. So the president of El Salvador estimates that the money services, so they moved to Bitcoin. So now people overseas can send Bitcoin easily to their relatives in El Salvador. El Salvador has really ramped up the ability to do that. They estimate that money services like Western Union, MoneyGram will lose $400 million a year in commissions for remittances now that people can send. What that means is, like, there's a guy working his butt off in the United States in El Salvador, and he's trying to send money to his family. Western Union was chunking 15% off of each payment. Now the transaction fee is literally less than 0.01% at high peak, right? So more of that value actually gets to people that can use it and turn it into something. So immigrants are actually empowered to be able to send money to their family and help things out. And ultimately, actual equality. That went back to my original point. Not everybody starts with the same amount of money. But what poor people have always said, and you can look this up, is they don't want a handout. They want you to give them something, a foundation that is equal, and then get out of their way. Meaning, they don't need a handout. They need money that's stable, and they'll go build their life and what they have. And actually, if you look around the world in places where there has wealth that has grown, it's because people have gotten out of the way of the poor and let them use their own ingenuity and various things like that, and have not prevented them from bringing value. So this gives them that foundation. Then they don't have to wonder, if I use my local currency, is the grift happening? Is the government taking some of it? Is the corrupt politicians, et cetera, so forth and so on. Functional asset deflation. Housing prices have now priced a lot of young people out of the market in Colorado and many places across the United States for more than one reason. But one of the main reasons is people are looking for somewhere to send their value through space-time. And property, real estate, has been one of those things. But it doesn't have to be. It's only because we don't have any other better options. So Chinese investors will come buy up swaths of American farmland, like, BlackRock is buying tons of homes across the United States to try to send money through space-time and whatnot. With something like Bitcoin, we actually return a property, a land, back to its functional value so that families can afford housing again and people can afford to live places, depending on certain factors. Like, you go into a city, it's more compact, et cetera, et cetera. But the bottom line is that people aren't just buying a farm because they're trying to hide their gold somewhere, not literally, but trying to hide their value and move it through space-time. So functional assets like that, assets become functional again, and not these pie-in-the-sky real estate investments or pie-in-the-sky investments trying to make money on things that are more useful than they are investments. Finally, making savings work again. We've all grown up in this era And so it's hard to understand that before this, people would just save money. Now, in order to save money, we have to beat inflation rates of 8 to 12 to 15%, which is why people play the stock market, why 401ks exist. We're desperately trying to stay ahead of all the money printing. So we're picking higher and higher risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's value, there's real value, and I think it's holy value in saving money for the future in a way that says, I've worked hard today, I don't have to take this out. You could take it out and risk it, or you could say, I'm going to save it. It's something I've worked on hard, and I'm going to put it to the future. I'm going to give it to my kids. I'm going to invest in something in the future in some sense, but I have this nest egg that's not at risk without me having to run out and take high risks to earn more money and keep it from losing its value over time. If you take dollars and you just put them in a savings account right now, and you're not making 8 to 12%, you're losing it. Your savings is disappearing right now. That's just the nature of the way it is. I know the official government CPI inflation rates, that they keep changing what's in the basket, meaning they keep picking things that don't include food, gas, all the things we actually need. And they're like, no, inflation's really low, because they're choosing things that are specifically aimed at showing that inflation is not terrible, when those things are actually deflating faster, not faster, but deflating at such a high rate that they actually don't look like they have inflation. Side note. So, final thoughts. I can answer more questions about this, but I'm just going to say Bitcoin is not a cryptocurrency. What happened with FTX, what happened with a lot of these cryptocurrencies are ways of trying to create Bitcoin, but by making self-defeating trade-offs and actually centralizing and becoming something that's not Bitcoin. So don't, if you're like, oh, I think I'm gonna go out and don't go out and buy cryptocurrency. Buy Bitcoin. That's the thing that matters. The rest of it is all pretending, or in some sense with good faith trying something, but there's certain effects, and I can talk more about this in the Q&A, about how Bitcoin came into its existence that cannot be repeated. It was like the virgin birth of sorts, and I don't mean that, but I mean like there are certain ways in which it flew under the radar until it was too big to fail, and you can't do that again in an easier manner without people knowing about it. It's still early. The fact that it's priced right now at what, 23,000 a Bitcoin, please. If you think about all the assets and all the amount of money that's invested in property and stuff like that, that's Bitcoin's coming for it. So right now, as I like to joke with my kids, someday my kids will be like, my dad bought Bitcoin when it was like only 23,000 a Bitcoin. Like, it'll seem absurd in some sense, because Bitcoin, because of what it is, will slowly take bites out of the bigger and bigger pie as people realize its value and enter the network. And then finally, and then we'll go to questions, do your own research. I started in 2016, and I was really skeptical. A friend of mine was like, I'm buying some Bitcoin. I'm like, idiot. But I liked it. I mean, I was just like, you're going to get washed. And I was like, but let me go look into it. And I started reading it. And I was like, oh, well, no, that can't be true. I'm sure this thing will be this, and I'll go research this. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, that is. And every one of my skepticisms began to fall. And I have to struggle nowadays because I feel, if you know what a homer is, or like a super fanatic, but I keep waiting for the thing that's going to show that it's not what the foundation shows it to be. And I've been more and more convinced in the last 6 years, 2016? Yeah, so.